right, good evening, everybody.
Oh, welcome to our speaker series this evening. Welcome.
Yeah, Erin, I feel like we're going every night this week with the speaker
Oh
series,
my
the experts,
gosh.
virtual hangout. I got cooking tomorrow with you.
I know. I'm so
Very
excited. It's
fun.
been a great month. It's been a great month.
Great
So
month.
if you haven't checked out our video library, we'll be teasing this quite a bit. Be sure to check that out. We have recordings of everything, but we're really excited to be focusing on this segment and I think this unique conversation around clinical trials tonight.
Agree. And the clinical trial conversation is actually involving community voices and how we can advocate and inform and connect. And being in this space, we know how valuable clinical trials are. We know how valuable the research is and how we can't move it forward. So it was so interesting how our panel took a different approach that we learned about. And we're bringing that all to you tonight.
Yeah, really exciting. So, this is our second speaker series. So, if you are new to joining our segment, we are recording. So, if you want to come back and rewatch our segment, it will be available on our UFH Connect video library. There will be plenty of discussion at the end and time for questions and even learning about how you can get involved in your community. So, please know you're welcome to put your questions in the chat or raise your hand at the end. It'll be a really great, I think, group conversation tonight. So know that we have that coming. And of course, before we go any further, I want to make sure we thank our sponsors for this evening.
Yeah, thank you, Erin. We can't do what we do without them. I want to say we are well over 50 plus different education series that we bring to our community. A lot of them are driven by our community, telling us what you would like to hear, what is front of mind. So a very grateful thank you to our presenting sponsors, which is West, Merck, Lilly, Novartis, and Gilead Sciences, with support from our gold sponsors, Pfizer, GSK, and Daiichi Sankyo, and our supporting sponsors, AbbVie, TerraSera Therapeutics, and Verastem Oncology. We are most grateful. And I cannot say enough about what that library looks like now. It is so robust over the past 5 years. So please check it out, uniteforher.org/her library. You can then get in there and really search by topic, anything that you can think of in navigating the cancer space and your treatment and beyond and into survivorship. And we find it to be very, very helpful, especially in this world where you're not quite sure where to find all the facts and the right information that is going to be tailored to you. So we are always here for you, and thank you to our sponsors for letting us have very robust conversations like we're having tonight.
Absolutely. And like Sue said, we have this does not quite wrap up our November. And I have to say, I'm really excited for tomorrow night's segment, although I am very excited to this panel. But we are wrapping up just in time for Thanksgiving. We have our virtual hangout tomorrow evening with our entire culinary dietitian team. And together, we will be setting your holiday table. So, myself, Aubrey, Michelle, and Catherine are each taking a dinner course, and we are cooking and preparing wonderful, healthy holiday recipes. So that will be taking place tomorrow. That is Wednesday, November 19th at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. So come and hang out with us. We'll be sharing our recipes. It'll be a great evening, and I think something that'll get us all in the mood for the holiday season. So hopefully, we will see you tomorrow night as well.
Perfect. All right, Erin,
Let's get started.
get started.
Wonderful. So it is my pleasure to introduce our panelist who will be kicking off our segment this evening. So, Amy Leader is a professor in the Division of Population Science, Department of Medical Oncology at Thomas Jefferson University. She's the Associate Director for Community Outreach and Engagement at Sidney Kimmel Cancer Center at Jefferson, which is an NCI designated comprehensive cancer center. In her role, Dr. Leader creates and evaluates pathways to foster the bidirectional interaction interaction of patients and researchers to foster transparency in science and trust in clinical trials. She received her undergraduate degree from the University of Pennsylvania and her master's and doctorate degrees in public health from George Washington University's School of Public Health. So please join me in welcoming our first speaker this evening, Dr. Amy Leader. Amy, thank you so much for joining and kicking us off tonight.
Erin, thank you so. Oh, look, there's a heart. How sweet. Thank you, Erin. It is such a pleasure to be with you all. I really appreciate the invite this evening, and I may come back tomorrow for those holiday dinner meals. I didn't realize what a good week this was.
Good.
But for this evening, I'm here to talk to you all about the idea of research advocates, which you may or may not have heard of before, but the three of us here on the panel are here to share the importance of them, the rationale for them, our experience in working with them, and even our experience in being one of them. So I am going to take the slightly boring role here of doing the background so that you're ready to hear from Dr. Roque and Ms. Johnson. So I do have slides. I promise they're not many, and this is not an overly academic talk, I promise. But sometimes slides can go a long way when people have things to look at. So give me 1 second here. How are we looking, Erin? Okay. Okay. So I'm going to lay this foundation of engaging patients and community members in cancer research activities. So why do we do this? And it starts from, and it's really the foundation of building trust and understanding of science and research. And you may know, and you have heard, and particularly during the pandemic, there's been an erosion of trust and difficulties in understanding science and research. And so this is where a lot of this work stems from. And so not to bore you with the data, but I kind of find this interesting as well. And so every couple of years, this group called the Pew Research Center surveys Americans and they ask them all sorts of questions. And some of them catch my eye. And there are two of them here that were related to confidence in scientists and confidence in understanding and believing research. Hold on, let me make you all a little smaller there. There we go. And so the one on the left, they asked the American public, how much confidence do you have in scientists? And you'll see here by the light blue bars at the top that most Americans have a fair amount or a great deal in the blue bars of confidence in scientists. It dipped during the pandemic, it's on its way back up, but by and large, most people have confidence in scientists. And also, a majority of Americans say they are more apt to trust research when the data is openly available. So you see those first two lines there. The more trust in research when data is openly available to the public and or reviewed by an independent committee. People like that. People feel that that's trustworthy data. There's a little less trust when it's funded by the government or an industry group, but those top ones really get to the point that people want to see the research. They want to know what's going on. And that's really hard to do when it's in a laboratory. We can't always be there to see those experiments, and those scientists are behind their closed doors developing clinical trials, and nobody can see what it looks like. And so it's tricky for people to have trust in us when they can't see what we're doing. The other piece of the puzzle that's kind of interesting is Americans see research scientists as intelligent people, which is lovely. But they say we're not good communicators of our science at all. So while we score nicely and high in the intelligence bin, we do not score well in being able to communicate our science. And so you can see on the right here, we're talking about apples. The public is thinking we're talking about oranges. And that also just contributes to the strong disconnect in science. And another piece of data here, roughly a third of Americans still believe their lives wouldn't be that different if science didn't exist. Sort of lending itself to the fact that we are not doing a good job of communicating the importance of science to the public. A third of our country does not think that clinical trials have been helpful, that every medicine that they've ever used or taken has come from science. We are just not communicating this well, which is leading to erosions in trust and transparency and all the things that go with it. And then, if that wasn't enough, the pandemic, as you all know, caused a massive rise in scientific misinformation. So not only do we not communicate our science well, people can't distinguish between the real science and the not real science, the good science and the junk science. And so it's really, really difficult to get good science communicated well to the public so that they can understand it, they can trust it, and they can see it. So we're in a little bit of a conundrum here. And how do we do better? So, one answer has been the rise of research advocates. And that's what we're going to focus in on this evening. And I'll tell you a little bit more about them before I turn over this presentation. So, you probably have heard of patient advocates. Some of you may be patient advocates, or you even have been helped by patient advocates. They guide people through the healthcare system, this complicated cancer care system in our country. They help people navigate appointments and understanding their results and scheduling and transportation and anxiety and fear and communicating with their providers and helping with their families and even some work in advocacy and policymaker work. You may be a patient advocate and are helping to do this right now. But this has also led to a group of people known as research advocates, which do something very similar, except their liaison is between patients and the scientific research community. They help patients understand the work that we're doing in language that they understand. They help explain the research findings so that they can be translatable to people. They provide a patient perspective on the work so that we're designing clinical trials and research that patients will actually participate in. And sometimes they're actually doing a teaching role in community settings, maybe at a church event or a library event or somewhere in the community saying, you know, I know about clinical trials and let me tell you about them so that you're not so scared of them or you down in the future. So patient advocates exist and are well known, but there's also a group called research advocates that are serving a lovely purpose and helping us scientists do a much better job of translating our science, inviting community members into our science, and really helping to advocate for the clinical trials and the research. And so while this idea of a research advocate may be new to you tonight, the idea in the cancer world is developing and not entirely new. There are multiple programs across the country. You're going to hear from Ms. Johnson this evening, who's part of the PIVOT program at the University of Kansas Cancer Center. It's one of the oldest and most well-respected research advocate programs. There's other ones at Moffitt. There's one at my own cancer center with the little magnifying glass called the CLEAR program. I'll tell you about that in a second. University of Illinois in Chicago. I just picked a few. AACR is a national organization that trains scientists to survivor program. Those are research advocates. The PCORI, Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute, is a funding mechanism, and they value research advocates in the funding. There's many of these across the country, and as Erin said, we can talk later about how we might help you identify one if you're interested in becoming involved. So let me just give you a little flavor here and tell you just for a second about ours at our cancer center. Ours is called affectionately the Making Research Clear program, and that's communities learning and engaging about research for CLEAR. And this is designed really for anyone who wants to understand the cancer research and clinical trials process a little better. We tend to focus on cancer patients, survivors, family members because they have a vested interest in research and clinical trials, but we don't limit their participation in any way. Anyone who's interested in cancer research and clinical trials is good for us. And what this program does is it bridges the gap it trains research advocates. It bridges the gap between patients and community members and the researchers and investigators like me and others in cancer centers via an immersive 6-month experience. Now, it's not a everyday full day job. People have jobs. It goes over the course of 6 months, and we expect that these partnerships between a community member, a research advocate, and a scientist, they spend at least 1 day together a month, if not more, in the laboratory, attending research meetings, looking at data, watching experiments, asking questions about the experiments, asking questions about the data, providing ideas and suggestions about the approach that's going on in that lab, meeting the researchers and hearing their stories, as well as telling their stories about why they're interested in research and clinical trials. And then we also round it out with some other things. We have a monthly speaker series where they dive in a little bit deeper, and we hear from a journal editor about what it takes to publish some of this research. We hear from someone from an institutional review board, an IRB leader, who talks about the protocol review process and what that looks like. They're able to sit in on an IRB protocol review meeting and see the investigators talk about the new science and the protocols and vote on whether they should be clinical trials at our institution or not. We hear from a science writer about how they translate science to the public. And then they have additional activities that they can attend, like attending some research talks, community events. Some of them do advocacy work with us. But in the end, it gives someone a well-rounded experience to becoming a research advocate with us. We have been evaluating this program on measures of trust and transparency because we think those are very important, as well as appreciation and a value of those community voices in research on the investigator side. And to date, we've trained 16 research advocates who are now partnered and all out across our cancer center, helping other patients understand clinical trials, talking in their communities about research and clinical trials, and really just being a liaison and an ambassador to us. And we are doing this program every January to June. So we're about to onboard our next set of research advocates. And so just sort of closing in here, the roles of research advocates, they can be broad. This is a little bit of a continuum where they may just be informing or sharing their story about how they've been infected by a clinical trial or how they might be able to alter study plans. But then as you move sort of along the trajectory, a research advocate could become more involved or more embedded in the trial development and process itself in consultative role, a collaborative role, deciding together on decisions about how that trial is designed or rolled out or that study. And then even ultimately a stakeholder directed is really where patients or community members have a really strong vested interest and are making a lot of the decisions in partnership with the researchers, but they're really kind of taking the lead there. We think about that as community generated research. So there really is there's a spectrum of how involved a research advocate can get in any kind of a research project. And so just sort of in closing here, the impact of them and why we think this has been really important and helpful in science is they do provide valuable contributions in terms of feasibility of studies, acceptability of clinical trials, the relevance and the rigor. If we design a clinical trial, no matter how amazing the science is, if a patient or a cancer patient says to us, I'm not enrolling in that trial. It's really hard. It looks difficult. The things you're asking me to do are really complicated to be in this trial. We need to know those things so we can design better trials that patients will do. Engaging patients can increase the quality of the trial in terms of integrating it into care. We learn new skills from our patients and it broadens our perspectives. Also about what's important to patients, what we should ask on our surveys or what we should measure. And also, patient partners can play an important role in disseminating those research findings, getting back to that idea of helping us communicate our science better. I can write a peer-reviewed manuscript for a journal, but if a research advocate gives a presentation at a church or a community group about the research, that's going to go a lot farther, I believe. And also, in the end, engaging our advocates early in the research process really facilitates the design of patient-centric clinical trials, which is really our goal all along. We want to design clinical trials and research that's important to patients, that they will be involved in, that we can accrue patients to see the end result so we can change the science and we can advance science and have better treatments in the long run. So I believe that is my last slide. I'm going to stop sharing. And just hopefully that's a little bit of a foundation now of the importance of this, what a research advocate can do, how we do a little bit of training. And now I'm going to pass it back to Erin to get to the really fun part of this webinar.
Thank you. That was wonderful. I think it was a perfect way to sort of set the tone and very eye-opening. I think this is a piece of clinical trials that many of us were just unaware was available. And for those that feel really strongly about sharing what's available, what research trials are out there, and dispelling some of those myths, this is a great way to get involved. So, Amy, thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you, Amy. All right, we're going to bring in our next speaker. So, Dr. Dario Roque, thank you for joining us. Dr. Roque received his medical degree at the University of Florida. He completed his residency in obstetrics and gynecology at Brown University, where he was elected administrative chief resident and received multiple awards for teaching and surgical excellence. Dr. Roque went on to complete a gynecologic oncology fellowship at the University of North Carolina, where he completed extensive training in robotic surgery. Dr. Roque is board certified in OBGYN and gynecologic oncology, and he's fluent in Spanish. And thank you for agreeing to share your research tonight that involves patients and community members. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here. It's a different experience for me. I usually do these events more locally. I love the idea of community engagement. Like I do think we are able to achieve a lot when we engage the community and patients and patient advocates. So just a little bit about me beyond of what was already been said. So I'm a GYN oncologist. I practice in Northwestern University in Chicago. So I have been here now for 5.5 years. And one of the great things about Chicago, I'm not from Chicago. I was actually born in Cuba and lived in Florida. And like Sue mentioned, I have moved a lot around the East Coast, and this is my first stint in the West. But one of the great things about Chicago is it's a very diverse city. So we have multiple different neighborhoods, people from a very multicultural, multiracial city, which is something that I really enjoy because I get to take care of patients from everywhere. And one of my interests has always been the idea of making sure that every single patient has access to clinical trials, because in my mind, a clinical trial, if available, should be the standard of care for any patient that's facing a cancer diagnosis, certainly in situations where that patient needs systemic therapy, either chemotherapy, immunotherapy, targeted therapy. The reason we have so many of these options right now is precisely because of clinical trials. We would not have drugs like Keytruda or Jemperli or many of the other targeted therapies that are available out there for patients if it wasn't for the fact that those drugs were tested in clinical trials and were shown to be better than what was available at the time, than the standard of care. However, one thing that we know for a fact is that sometimes those trials are only available to certain patient populations. So, for example, many of the clinical trials that have been conducted in GYN oncology for ovarian cancer, endometrial cancer, cervical cancer, the number of African American women, Hispanic women that have enrolled in those trials, or even in some instances, even women from the US in general. So there's some trials that are primarily conducted in Europe with very low accrual in the United States. So one of my goals is truly to try to, enhance the diversity and availability of clinical trials to patients, regardless of where their background or where they're coming from. So what I have done locally, I applied for some funding through the Chicago Bears organization. So they have a philanthropic arm. It's called Bears Care, and they primarily fund ovarian and breast cancer research. And one of the things that I wanted to do to make sure that I could centralize or at least create this database with all of the clinical trials that are available for gynecologic cancers in the city of Chicago. So Chicago, again, is a very large city. I believe it's like the third or fourth largest city in the US. So it's not only very diverse, but there's also multiple academic medical centers. There's 2 NCI designated cancer centers in the city. So there's Northwestern, where I work, and then there's the University of Chicago. So because of that, we have a lot of institutions that have clinical trials available. But unfortunately, the way that medicine is set up these days, a lot of times you get siloed into one institution. So if you've been treating for breast cancer, ovarian cancer, you're seeing a doctor, you're seeing a GYN oncologist, potentially you're also seeing a medical oncologist, depending on whether the GYN oncologist uses chemotherapy or not. And in that interaction, if there's clinical trials available at that institution, that's great, and you might qualify for them. But even if they have trials that are available because of what's called eligibility criteria, you may not qualify for those trials. And in those instances, you may not have the option to participate in a clinical trial, even if you wanted to. So in my case, what I always do is, I would reach out to University of Chicago, UIC, so University of Illinois in Chicago. There's Rush to see if they had a trial available for my patients. And it happens the other way as well. So one thing that I wanted to do was try to create this centralized database where I could go, or any provider, any patient, any research advocate, any patient advocate could go and identify potential trials based on those eligibility criteria that a patient could qualify for. So we created this site. It's called impactchicago.com. It's impact with an E. And what it does, it uses very simple filtering criteria. Maybe I might be able to show it. Let me see. Maybe I could do like a very quick demonstration here. Let me see if I can. Sorry, I should have prepared for this part.
No, I actually love that.
Um, yeah, so if I'm able to share my screen. Let's do this. All right, can you guys see that?
Mm.
Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay,
Yep.
perfect. So yeah, so
Yep.
it's a very simple website. It has some information. It had like about GYN cancer education, but the main thing, the main reason for this website, it was to provide this clinical trial finder. We also have created it both in Spanish and English, so we have this feature that it translates the whole website from English to Spanish. That way, it's available to more patients. We're trying to add more languages to it. And then, so any patient, any provider, patient advocate can go in here and click on this clinical trial finder, and then start the trial finder, and then some very simple prompts, right? So for example, for ovarian cancer, whether it's newly diagnosed, and we try to make it very simple so that patients could understand, because there's a lot of eligibility criteria, so I'll show you later, but these are some of the more basic ones that most patients, or the majority of patients, should be able to know some of this information. But you'll be surprised, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later. But basically, saying whether the cancer is back or after the first treatment, after more than 2 prior lines. And what it does then, eventually, it will show you all the different trials that are available within the city of Chicago. So in a way, this is not that dissimilar. If you're familiar with clinicaltrials.gov, there's like every single trial available in the whole US is available there, but it is very, very overwhelming, because even if you try to filter it by city, it's a lot, right? So this makes it a little bit more digestible. So then if any of this trial sounds appealing, or you wanted to learn more information, you can click on this. And then it will go further down, like into more details about the eligibility criteria for the trial. So this is where you start to get into a more granular type of eligibility criteria, this is where you would need assistance from either a research advocate, a patient advocate, potentially your own doctor, but at least it gives patients and their families or their providers the ability to say, oh, this trial might be available. Should I try to look a little bit further into this option? So we created that, and then what we're trying to do now is we also realize that a lot of times patients are not aware of some of these most basic criteria that we're talking about, right? Like the disease type, the stage, the number of prior lines of therapy. When you're talking about ovarian cancer, there's what we call, platinum sensitive versus platinum resistant. Many patients just don't know that. It's just a lot of information. So one of the things that we decided to do is then partner with community-based organizations that primarily serve cancer patients. And I've gone out to the community. We've done some community-based events where just the mere fact that those community-based organizations are bringing us to the community, it allows us to gain the trust of the patients, right? So we're doing this in communities of color, like African American communities. I just did a presentation at the Mexican consulate a couple of weeks ago. So it's the idea of like bringing this to the community, helping them understand, but then also teaching the community-based organizations use these tools so that they can potentially help the clients that they serve, the patients that they serve, identify the clinical trials, and then refer them to to the specific, or the institution where the trial is open. So it's a very small project. It's like very local, but I do think, hopefully we think we're making an impact in the community. Even though Chicago, again, it has all of these options, you'd be surprised the number of patients that are seen in more community-based practices that have never heard of a clinical trial or have never been offered clinical trials. So the idea behind this project is, again, to enhance the number of trials that are available to patients, even if they're being treated in academic medical center, but also to enhance the awareness of clinical trials and hopefully increase the number of patients that are being treated in community-based centers or even in more rural communities where there might not be trials available, and making them aware and letting them know that this is an option so that they can be referred and travel to the centers where a trial is available. And I'm going to stop there because I could go on talking about this for the next 45 minutes, but yeah, so I'll stop there. And thank you for having me.
You're welcome. I know you have to leave us a little early, so there were a couple questions in the chat, and Aaron, I think we'll get to them now just so that he can get to his daughter's recital. Okay, so Dr. Roque, are you envisioning that you're going to add breast cancer to this? We have a breast and ovarian cancer community. So one of the questions was, is this going to be available for breast cancer?
Yeah, so that we wanted to start with GYN because GYN cancer, it's a little, even though there's like multiple cancers, there's ovarian, endometrial, cervical, then it's a little bit more manageable. And there's also not a lot, which is not a great thing, but there's not a lot of trials necessarily available for gynecological cancer. So breast cancer is it's huge, right? Because it's very common. There's a lot of trials that are constantly being run, which is great. But ideally, yes, that would be perfect world because our clinic is connected to the breast clinic. So in our infusion center, we treat both GYN and breast cancer patients. So it will be like a very easy transition in that regard. But it obviously all comes to funding and help because right now, like I am running this by myself with a research associate, and basically we have to update the database every so often to make sure that it's updated. So trying to add all the breast cancer trials across the whole city, it would take like a lot more effort. But ideally, yes, that would be what we would love to do.
Yeah, I'm thinking you're looking to use this as a template that you can actually then grow and expand. And that was another question that we had was where else besides Chicago are these trials? So I know that certain trials list certain cities, multiple cities
Right.
that they can be available in, but I am thinking that this one is only for the community of Chicago right now.
And I mean, to be honest, there clinicaltrials.gov basically lists every single trial across the whole US. But if you've ever gone in it or used it, it can be quite cumbersome. But if you do have someone that is savvy and knows how to navigate it, that could be it's the same tool. But you basically need someone to help you navigate it because it's quite cumbersome. I mean, I do this for a living. I do it every day. And like going into clinicaltrials.gov is quite overwhelming because then you have to know how to set the filters and try to figure out, which trials are open or not recruiting or close. So it's a lot.
Yeah, thank you. That is actually something that Unite for Her has dove into recently is just bring awareness clinical trials. We have a couple other platforms that we promote on our site. So it just allows our community to feel more at ease and understand the criteria and not feel like they keep clicking and then realize that they don't qualify. So
Right.
It looked very streamlined and easy to navigate. And we wish you really the best of luck to continue to use that type of template for other cities to come.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I do have one question because I know, sometimes trials are conducted in varying cities across the country. So for those right now that have a GYN cancer, is this a site that potentially they could go to if they find they qualify, see if there's an arm at a cancer center in their area? So this, in theory, even for those that are with us tonight, might be a good place to start to see if, okay, there may be something available to me in the part of the country in which they reside.
That's correct. So so a lot of those, basically every single one of those trials is within Chicago, right? And it doesn't mean that they're all Northwestern. And I should have shown you, but it says which institution and which provider because not all of those trials are at every single institution. The idea is to list all of the trials regardless of the institution. But you're absolutely right. So a lot of those trials are going to be open in more than one institution, and not only in Chicago, but it could be like in Philadelphia or Texas, New York, um, and vice versa. There might be trials open right now in Philadelphia or New York that we don't have available either in Northwestern or in Chicago. So that is the reason why it's always helpful to ask, because there might be trials that are only open, for example, at MD Anderson or Sloan Kettering or Northwestern. Um, Generally, the larger, phase 3 trials that are enrolling thousands of patients, those are the ones that typically you're going to have better luck finding local options, because those trials are trying to recruit thousands of patients, and the easiest way to do that is by opening in multiple places. But if you're looking at like early phase trials, which are more experimental, those are a little bit harder to identify in more than one institution.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you for that. That is great.
Terrific. All right, Erin, I'll let you introduce our next guest.
Yeah, and we are rounding out this discussion. So we've heard from some researchers, but it's really wonderful to hear from someone that is working in the research and community advocate space. So it is my pleasure to introduce Peggy Johnson. Peggy is a 30-year cancer and access to care advocate, as well as a triple negative breast cancer survivor. Ms. Johnson has been actively involved in the field of cancer for several decades. As a founding member of the University of Kansas Cancer Center's Patient Research Advocacy Program, known as PIVOT, which stands for, we heard earlier, Patient and Investigator Voices Organizing Together. She currently serves as chair of the PIVOT Education Committee. Ms. Johnson served on the Susan G. Komen Kansas Mission Advisory Council. I'm sorry, I'm fumbling over my words. And an affiliate for more than 29 years. She has quite a bit of experience. Public policy has always been a large area of focus for her, working to make sure everyone has access to the best quality of healthcare and treatment. So, Ms. Johnson, Peggy, thank you so much for being here, sharing your experience as a research advocate.
Thanks. Thanks to Unite for Her and to Sue and Erin for doing this. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's great to be with you today. Again, I'm Peggy Johnson. I live in Wichita, Kansas. I have to tell you, I loved both of the presentations before us. We could have quit after Amy, except then Dario came in and gave us some real life stuff. So I really appreciate. I'm having to pull up the bottom here, so I hope I can do it. I'm just going to give you my experience here. So, like I said, I live in Wichita, Kansas, and I've been a long time breast cancer advocate, both locally and nationally. I helped start Komen Race for the Cure in Wichita with our first race in 1990. To say the least, a lot has changed in 35 years since we started. There were very few clinical trials in 1990, and the national funding for breast cancer and cancer together were extremely low. Through the efforts of advocates, that thankfully has changed. What also has changed is the recognition that breast cancer patients and other cancer survivors can provide important information to their doctors and to scientists in their research and certainly in developing clinical trials. It is only in the last 10 to 20 years or so that investigators would have had the opportunity or the interest in talking with the survivor. That is quickly changing, and through conversations, cancer patients and survivors can help their doctors and researchers understand what is difficult or how it could be better. We all know that things can be better if we talk and we listen. When I was diagnosed with triple negative breast cancer in 2012, I made the decision to be treated at the University of Kansas Cancer Center in Kansas City. It was a 3-hour drive for my husband and I, 3 hours up, 3 hours back. My decision was driven by knowing that the KU Cancer Center was actively researching breast cancer, and I wanted to know and I wanted to be treated where research was being done. In 2004, Dr. Roy Jensen had been hired as the director of the Cancer Center at KU. I had previously known Dr. Jensen as he was a Komen-funded researcher while at Vanderbilt. Dr. Jensen and his staff worked hard at being recognized as a National Cancer Center. In 2012, KU was and earned the designation as a National Cancer Center, and 6 years later achieved Comprehensive Cancer designation. I might be able to tell you the difference between the two, but not tonight. The work it took for KU to receive these designations was arduous and it was time consuming. While working for these designations, KU took a deep look at the needs of their patients and their surroundings. Through hours of conversation, talking not only to cancer survivors, but also talking to the community leaders in the communities that they serve, KU started working on plans to bring patients into the conversation of cancer treatment, and even more importantly, in developing cancer clinical trials. KU first developed a place for cancer patients, survivors, co-survivors, and even previvors to start to have a voice in treatment in clinical trials. The result was our organization, Patients and Investigators' Voices Organizing Together. That's a lot. So it's called Pivot. We now have 200 Pivot members. We have several subcommittees who all help to develop programs and opportunities for our advocates. KU also developed a place for community leaders to have a voice, to provide better ways to reach into their communities for not only clinical trials and treatments, but also how patients would be screened and how to develop screening programs. We call it the Community Advisory Board, or CAB. We're good on short names. We have anywhere from 20 to 30 members who meet quarterly and share what's happening in their communities. So I'm talking about all of Kansas and the eastern 1/4 of Missouri. And so we have, they are survivors, they're co-survivors. Some of them are just community members who are interested in their communities getting better treatments. We meet quarterly and we share what's going on in our communities. And the Cancer Center always provides a program to highlight and inform about the programs that are being developed and the ongoing things that are going on at the Cancer Center. We have found that our community members become very interested in our efforts and rarely miss a meeting. The point is, the Cancer Center talks to our members, but our members get to talk back. Our meetings are in person for those who can be in person or close, or by Zoom for those who need to come online. I most often attend by Zoom. I believe that the Cancer Center has become a partner in patients and their families' lives, but also a trusted member in communities it serves in Kansas and Eastern Missouri. Everybody benefits by having a voice. I'm going to give you just a very short example of being a cancer research advocate. This happened many years ago when I was just beginning, but I was reviewing a cancer clinical trial for women who were stage 4, and they were going to try a new treatment on them. And in the protocol, it was required that the patients would come in once a week for a biopsy. I hadn't had cancer yet, but I knew that they were going to get very people who would sign up for a clinical trial that had to either travel or, if it was close, go in to get a biopsy. That it just did not seem like it was going to work. I got to talk to the scientist. He and I had a nice conversation. I told him what I thought, and they indeed did change that in their clinical trial. Um, I believe that the future of treatment for cancer is in clinical trials if we get to keep them. We're all holding our breath. And that more and more advocates are becoming very good friends with researchers and their doctors. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I love that. Thank you for sharing your story and that example. And just hearing a little bit more about the role and really bringing it to life, Peggy, that was wonderful.
Thank you.
Yeah. So now we can bring everyone on and we can open it up to any questions, anyone here that wants to raise their hand, or if you have questions in the chat that you'd like to ask anyone on our panel, please feel free to raise your hand or, like I said, put them in the chat. I'm curious, I think the first question that for me that comes to mind, because we serve members across the country, is finding out or what question they may ask if someone wants to become or learn about a potential community research advocate in their area. Amy, you had that great slide of several programs, but is there a place someone could go to inquire about if this is available near them?
That's a great question. We need a repository like Dario created for these programs. There are a few of them that are nationally based. Like I mentioned, AACR has a Scientist to Survivor program. There's a few others. But also I would ask where you're being treated, ask your cancer center if there's a research advocate program. They're growing. Many cancer centers have them. And if they don't, if they say, I don't know what you're talking about, then maybe you might want to consider one of the larger ones, like a national organization like AACR, American Cancer Society has something. But I think maybe just a simple question the next time you're at your treatment center. Are there any programs like this?
I
Wonderful.
think I
And
would add to that is if they say no, say why not.
Yeah,
oh,
absolutely. Great question.
yeah. And you don't need prior experience, you don't need to be a patient, you don't need research knowledge. That is all information that someone can learn along the way. That is correct?
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Peggy.
I'm not sure we have anybody that's not a survivor, a co-survivor, a pre-survivor, or a patient. I don't know. We have almost 200 members. I haven't met them all. Um, I would guess that there are very few. I know that when we started, there were a couple, and I'm not sure that they've stayed in.
Just to add something, here in Chicago, they have what are called community health workers.
Mhm.
That's literally what they do, and they it's almost like social workers, and there's some of these community-based organizations I've worked with. They have been training them to understand clinical trials. So there are ways to engage people that are not necessarily cancer survivors. I mean, I think a cancer survivor is great, or a pre-survivor, or a family member, because they've been through it and they can be very engaged and know the system. So you have that added benefit. But at the end of the day, like if there can be a resource that can get patients to clinical trials, then that's great. And it is true, it might not be available. Like if you go to a community-based hospital, or like if you're like in a smaller town, you might have a harder time. But
Mhm.
in those cases, I would recommend connecting either with someone at the cancer center, like closer to you within the state, but definitely at the national organization. National organizations that can definitely help you.
That's a great point that you bring up, actually, Dr. Roque, because I know members from our wellness team have actually in Chicago connected with community health workers,
Hmm.
and I'm glad you sort of brought that together, that they could potentially also be research advocates as well, and can be an avenue to help patients also, as
Yep.
well as just sharing resources in their community. So that's a really great call out. I know that
Hmm.
that was a position that was new and sort of are recruiting and growing in varying cities across the country. And I know Chicago was one of the first with whom
Hmm.
we connected with some of those workers. So that's really great.
Yep.
We're, in Kansas, we're in the process of, because community health workers are becoming very, very important in Kansas, because we're a rural state, and they're able to get to patients and provide information quickly. But we're in the process of trying to train as many of the CHWs in how to connect somebody who's been diagnosed, especially a rural center where they're going somewhere and getting treatment and then going back to their home, how to connect. And almost everything on ours is done online. We have an educational program once a month. That's the committee that I'm on. We do, and it's for anyone. And then we do a training twice a year to train new volunteers. That's how we got as many as we've got. And those programs keep the interest in those volunteers so that they are constantly being fed new information, um, finding the place where they can fit in. Not everybody feels comfortable going in and talking to a researcher. And so educate your education programs are very important. And I'm sure Amy's programs are fabulous. I'd like to come in by remote if I can for some of them because they sound great.
Yeah, I'd love to connect with you, Peggy. We'd love to talk about that. But Erin, one more question to your point about the sort of expertise or qualifications. I think, remember, we're falling over scientific expertise and knowledge. We don't need any more scientific expertise. We need patient experience. We need stakeholders in their community who, just like Peggy said, are willing to go talk about the work that they're seeing, but certainly, no one should be intimidated by this. We don't need anyone who's an expert in cancer or oncology at all, because we're practically
Amazing.
falling over ourselves with too much expertise here.
Right. You need people to be out and sharing and making those connections. I love that call out.
Mhm.
Dr. Leader,
Wonderful.
can you
Yep.
share? I remember when we met and you were talking about how this whole grant that you had received was in the prostate cancer community. Is that correct? And you had individuals that went out in that community. Could you share a little bit on the successes of that? I thought it was so interesting because I really haven't heard of this approach. I would love to have you share that with the audience so they could sort of see the benefits that occurred when you actually activated this team of a lot of men to talk to other men about clinical trials.
Yeah, so this is a project around getting men more interested in just prostate cancer screening, but then also thinking about genetic testing for family history. And so we know that men are not great at going to the doctors for their screening. They don't know their family history. And so I received a grant funding to do this work, to increase prostate cancer screening in connection to genetic testing for males. And in Philadelphia, the group that's at highest risk are older Black males who are at highest risk for prostate cancer. And so I am none of the qualifications of an older Black male. I'm practically the opposite on all three of those, but I had the scientific understanding of the work to do. So I recruited a cadre of older Black men in the Philadelphia region who I trained to be research advocates and to be part of the research team with me. So they were the face of the research study in the community. They went out and talked about the importance of screening. They enrolled other men on this research study. They collected the data. I was always here in the background with my little scientific expertise hat and how to do those things, but they were the face of the project. And to be honest, the gentleman who did the top enrolling and recruiting on this project was a retired mailman. And he did so well because he knew all the men in his neighborhood because he delivered their mail for 50 years. And so he knew Mr. Johnson lived in that house and he knew Mr. Smith lived in that house and he had to go talk, and he just went down the line. And so it's things like that, qualities of being able to connect with people and to really feel passion like Peggy is sharing for the research and the need to invest community members and regular people in our research studies.
And Dr. Leader, do you see that now expanding to other cancers where you're going to take that same model and do it for breast and ovarian and endometrial?
Yeah, the sky's the limit, to be honest. I mean, the only limitation is, hours in the day, funding available, but any of this is replicable across topics, communities, different populations in different languages, as Dr. Roque was talking about, Spanish-speaking communities. It's all very adaptable.
That's great.
I love that. And we did have a question, Amy, about linking that research advocate training program in the chat here locally in Philadelphia. So I know you said you're starting up again in
Yeah.
January for that 6 month block of time. So
Yes.
for those that are in our local area or, generally in the region that are interested, let's definitely get that link out there.
Yes, I will. Let me just I'll put my email here. I don't mind putting it in the chat if it's not there. Just send me an email if you're local to Philly.
Perfect.
Perfect. Yeah, so
Great.
what's next for both of you? Are you currently involved in a grant project? Have you observed any of the shifts in funding or approval processes or research priorities under the current administration? Or are things humming along for both of you?
I don't know if humming along is what I would say. I think we're managing. I think we're making it through. It was a little bit touch and go there in the beginning. We just didn't know what was next. There was a lot of uncertainty. But hopefully things are starting to right their way. Just as things were starting to settle down, then we had the government shutdown. So, if it's not one thing, it's kind of the next. So, maybe 2026 will get us back on track. But I think for those of us who do this work, for Peggy and her research advocates and those in the Pivot program and myself, like we're committed and we're here and we're gonna stay the course. And so if we have to move left and move right, we will, but we're gonna stick around and we're gonna see it through.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I found this to be so inspiring. I know that our community members are always looking for ways to hear their voice, get their voice heard, help to really advance the clinical trial space. We all know that it is just completely the number one way that we are going to move from a breast cancer crisis to something that we can manage and where it no longer is something that cannot be cured until we get a clinical trial. And the more people we can enroll in them and understand them, the better. And I do feel like the community is the one to have that done, to get that done because there's trust. Just like United for Hers community has so much trust, right? It's not so much the pharma community, it's the actual patients that are experiencing, and they can advocate for the pharma community. They can advocate for the medical community because they have that firsthand experience and they're approachable. So I found both of your stories to be very intriguing and very aligned with our community, and I thank you for sharing tonight. It was so good to see that common thread and how, even though in very different parts of the US, it looks like that is a place that people can actually go to their local hospital and find out if there is this community research arm or assistant or program that they can lean into. So thank you both.
Yeah. Yeah, this is wonderful. So, and I know you and I have talked so much about, sharing with our community what they can do to advocate for clinical research and really be a voice. And I think that this is a new arm to that. This is something that we feel empowered that we can play a role to support the research community. So, thank you both for being here and shedding light and sharing your experience and the impact on which this community role can play. I think that this is really huge and a big difference maker. So thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thank you for having us. And Peggy, thank you for sharing your perspective. As always, your perspective was the highlight of this talk. So thank you.
I think you and I should communicate a little.
I would love to.
That'd be great. That'd be
We love
great.
being connectors.
Yeah. You
That's
guys are
our role here,
connectors.
Erin.
Thank you
All
all
right.
very
Welcome.
much.
Thank you, everyone.
I love you.
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Good night.
Good night.
All right.
There we go. Another one
Wonderful.
done, Erin. I found something so
Absolutely.
interesting. We're leaning into the clinical trial space and trying to make it much more easier. And just the knowledge is such power and not to feel like it's last resort. So we're more in tune to what is out there. And this is another area that I feel like we could really put on our website as a way to get involved. It makes sense.
Absolutely.
It makes sense to me.
It,
Clinical trials, all the um, false information around clinical trials is really from the community, right? Because
yeah.
they hear things and they heard about what happened to grandmom or thought they knew what happened to grandma, and they're continuing that story instead of
Right.
seeing that there are so many different ways that clinical trials are advancing the science and the research in disease. So
Yep.
I
Yep.
loved it. Yeah.
I loved it. Wonderful. So, yeah, so hopefully this was helpful for all of you attending and a little bit inspiring to how you can get connected in your community. We shared Amy's. If you're in the Philadelphia region, please feel free to reach out to her. And Sue, maybe we can look at linking out those other programs that Amy mentioned during her presentation as well for our national audience. So we'll look
Great.
at as well as sharing those programs. And with that, I want to remind everyone that this is not the last you will see of us this week. So hopefully, you'll
Tomorrow.
be joining us tomorrow night for our virtual hangout to get ready for the holiday season. So we have our Cooking Methods 101 at 5 p.m. Eastern tomorrow night on Zoom with our entire dietitian team. So please join us as we set the holiday table. It's a great night of cooking together and hopefully inspiring and fun and lighthearted and just a moment to be together in the kitchen.
Yeah, I'm happy to be joining you tomorrow. It's a lot of fun.
Uh, Always fun.
And then, of course, thank you to our sponsors once again. We can't do UFH Connect without them. We even have a Spanish version of UFH Connect, Cafecito, which has been so successful and growing. So thank you all for just giving us the topics that really are important to you. And then we go and do the research to find these incredible experts like tonight. So a big
Yep.
shout out for West and Merck and Lilly and Gilead and Novartis. They are our presenting sponsors this evening. Our gold sponsors, GSK, Pfizer, and Daiichi Sankyo, with support from TerraSera, AbbVie, and Veristem. So wonderful, Erin, right?
Wonderful, wonderful one, giving us all something to think about. Karen, you are absolutely right. Knowledge is power. So we are happy to bring
Power.
this new knowledge to all of us. So thank you for joining us this evening, everyone. We appreciate all of you being here and your really thoughtful questions.
All right. Good night, everybody. Have a
Good
wonderful evening.
night.
Good night.